Hello, my name is Jace Truman, and this is my Ideas of Freedom Museum exhibit on Native Americans in the early America and how they were oppressed and the different ideals of freedom that were among them. Alright, so Native American Museum exhibit. So Native Americans have inhabited North America for thousands of years. And with the arrival of Europeans, Native faced much unfair and unequal treatment from the Europeans. The fact that they had a different culture and ideals of freedom than Europeans caused them to be oppressed and have their land taken from them forcibly. So early history, Native Americans have inhabited North America for thousands of years. And in the textbook Give Me Liberty, written by Eric Foner, it says, most, however, were descended from bands of hunters and fishers who had crossed the Bering Strait via a land bridge at various times between 15,000 and 60,000 years ago. And that is a picture of what the strait would have looked like. So early Native societies. North America contained organized and developed societies by the Indians before Europeans ever arrived there. Many of the societies, such as the Aztec and Inca empires, were very large and had a very diverse culture among them. And this is an image of an artist's interpretation of the size of Tenochtitlan, the Aztec capital. So Europeans and natives. Europeans typically had a negative view of natives, thinking of them as barbarians and savages. Europeans believed they worshipped the devil, among other false gods, and Europeans believed Indian men were weak and that women were mistreated. So Europeans used these things as excuses to fight for and take over the Indians' land without any real good reason. So this is a video on kind of just highlighting the native culture and how diverse and how unique it was.
It is another world, thriving with 100 million people, connected by elaborate roads, bridges, and social networks spanning continents, with monumental cities aligned to the heavens, and some of the greatest civilizations on Earth. This is America more than 500 years ago. Native Americans create America's first democracy that later inspires the United States Constitution. Shape Mississippi swampland into the largest pyramids on the planet. Carve Andean mountain slopes into fields that feed millions. And domesticate plants that now provide 60% of the world's food. They elevate America's natural beauty into spiritual beliefs that echo across 10,000 years. And dig deep into those beliefs to survive the worst loss of life from disease and genocidal warfare in history.
We are not dead. We're often referred to in history books in the past tense. But here we are in the present, and we're going full force. We're still here.
The Inca traditions, the Inca knowledge has never disappeared. It is still alive. It's not a religion, it's a way of life.
When I come out onto the water, there's a connection to my ancestors, a relationship that goes through my blood and my veins.
As a Comanche woman, this just completes me, because all of my relatives were here. They probably prayed for us and prayed that someday we would be here and our culture would continue.
The people that have lived here have understood this place, and this knowledge has been accumulated over thousands of years. The past is also part of the present.
This is a new vision of America and the people who built it. This is Native America.
Alright. So let's continue on this presentation here. So Indian freedom in colonial America. So Indians always outnumbered the colonists in Spanish America. And Europeans considered the Indians to be barbaric because they did not appear to live under established governments or fixed laws, and they had no respect for authority. And that's also a quote from Eric Foner's Give Me Liberty, chapter 1, page 16. And however, Indians still had their own notions of freedom as they held slaves. And alright, suppression of Indian societies. So Europe believed reason for conquering America was to spread their faith, Christianity, So many natives taken slave for Spanish and Portuguese empires, which dominated the area in that time period. In the 1550s, encomienda system freed many of these slaves and granted Indians some basic rights. However, Indians still required to perform some fixed labor because of new reparmiendo system. So they instilled these systems to try and give the natives this false notion of freedom, to feel like they were gaining rights and gaining freedom, when in reality they were just exploiting them for labor. So, English colonization and Native Americans. So, in the early 1600s, Europeans from England began to focus on conquering North America. The English began sailing to North America and establishing colonies there. And these colonies became disease-riddled, dangerous environments, hurting the native population with new European diseases. So, English wanted to take native land for themselves and their own empire. So, Indian oppression in colonial America. Traders, religious missionaries, and the colonies wanted to reshape Indian society into European and English culture and ways of life. Rapid farming and hunting expansion into native territories depleted the natives' resources, and eventually natives began to realize English wanted to take over their land and not just set up a trading post. In the uprising of 1622, an Indian surprise attack on the Virginia colony, 1/4 of the settler population there was wiped out. So the English kind of set their supremacy in stone when a desperate last attempt Indian revolt was crushed by the settlers. But that was not without the Virginia colony taking heavy losses as well. So after this defeat, it began a series of unfair treaties the English started pushing on natives to oppress them further, to keep them from uprising and to be able to steal their lands easier. So new colonists and the natives, new groups such as the Puritans began coming to North America. As most Europeans, these Puritans saw Indians as savages with false gods, and they believed Indians held the wrong kind of freedom in their societies, and colonists were punished for trying to understand and potentially adopt the Indian way of life. So there's a history of oppression, and in a paper written by Blake T. Hilton called Frantz Fanon and Colonialism, A Psychology of Oppression, he says, through the historical and systematic attempt to destroy the Native American people and assimilate them to the Euro-white culture, European colonialism, and the United States in particular, has caused serious detrimental effects on the Native American psyche. So later colonialism and natives, Europeans started to push more and more unfair treaties on the natives, and in the Treaty with the Delawares, established in 1778, Article 3 states, through all succeeding generations, and if either of the parties are engaged in a just and necessary war with any other nation or nations, that then each shall assist the other in due proportion to their abilities. So they exploited them for fighting. And racism in Founding America video. So this is a video from the Choices program of Brown University, which highlights more on the racism and the judgments of race that were instilled into the early government of America towards the blacks and the natives as well.
Structural racism is much more obvious in the founding of the United States than it is in the contemporary world. Although sometimes we might think that it's obvious in the contemporary world too. But in the founding of the United States, it's just right there. The laws that were part of the founding of the United States were structured by ideas about race and racism, by ideas that, white people were good and should be free and should be citizens and should be able to vote and should be able to participate in government, and black people should not. The norms of the society around the economy and around labor were structured through race. So ideas about who should be doing labor without getting paid, i.e. who should be enslaved, that was racialized. It wasn't always racialized. It didn't start out that way. And it was complicated for a little while. But by the time the United States was being founded, the ideas were very clear that black people should be enslaved and white people should not be enslaved. And so that shaped every ounce of society. Even though some enslaved people became free and some white people worked in really terrible labor conditions, there was still this very baseline distinction between who should be free and who should be enslaved. And that shaped who could vote. It shaped who could participate in government. It shaped who could get married. It shaped who could be in charge of their own body versus who could be in charge of other people's bodies. It shaped absolutely everything, and so it was totally foundational to the United States.
All right. So continuing, natives in founding America. So the 13 colonies had taken most of their land, and now as a new country planned to expand more westward. So Indians were kept on small reserves and treated with discrimination and not considered citizens of the U.S. despite living on the land of the new country. So in native land, in 1787, the U.S. Congress began selling off large pieces of land inhabited by native tribes to private groups, and 1.5 million acres were sold to the Ohio Company. So, U.S. constitutions and natives. So, U.S. Congress began writing up the new constitution, such as the Articles of Confederation. And in these articles, natives were not even recognized as citizens of the states and were treated similar to the heavily oppressed African American population. And the U.S. kept expanding and selling off native land westward. So, the conclusion is Native Americans went from a flourishing and well-developed society with diverse culture to a heavily oppressed society with many struggles and the decimation of these societies over the course of a few hundred years by the Europeans. And that's it. This is my works cited page. This has been my presentation. I hope you enjoyed it.